A piercing cry cuts through the frozen winds of the Texas Panhandle, 1875, where Táhan, a battle-weary Comanche chief, seeks peace for his dwindling tribe. Once a terror to the U.S. cavalry, he now faces a heart-wrenching plea that could unravel his world. A dying mother's desperate wish binds him to a child, thrusting him into a storm of betrayal, violence, and a secret that could shatter everything. Will his vow hold against a ruthless enemy's schemes? Dive into this gripping tale of honor and sacrifice. Subscribe now and share where you're tuning in from. Stick around to uncover the shocking truth that changes a town forever. The Texas Panhandle howled under a bitter wind, the kind that gnawed through hide and bone, tearing at the edges of Táhan's buffalo skin lodge. Winter of 1875 had turned the prairie into a wasteland of frost-crusted grass and skeletal mesquite. The dry riverbed nearby, a scar across the earth. Táhan, once a Comanche war chief whose name made cavalrymen check their rifles twice, crouched by a low fire, his weathered hands warming over the flames. His braids, streaked with gray, hung heavy with the weight of years spent fighting, raiding, and losing. Now, with his small band, barely a dozen souls, he sought only to keep them fed, to hold a fragile peace against a world that wanted his kind erased. A cry sliced through the wind's moan, faint as a coyote's whimper, but sharp enough to jolt Táhan upright. His warriors, hunkered around the fire, froze, hands drifting to knives and pistols. The sound wasn't animal, wasn't Apache or Kiowa. It was human, desperate and close. Táhan stepped into the night, his moccasins silent on the frozen ground, eyes scanning the darkness. The wind carried the scent of snow and something else, blood, sharp and metallic. There, at the edge of the firelight, a figure staggered. A white woman, her dress torn to rags, clutched a child against her chest. Her face was gaunt, lips cracked, eyes wild with pain and fear. The girl, maybe 8, shivered violently, her hands purpled by frost, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Táhan's first instinct was to turn away. White settlers had brought nothing but death to his people, stealing land, burning villages, driving them to reservations. But the woman's gaze locked onto his, not with hatred, but with a plea that burned through the cold. "Chief," she rasped, her voice barely louder than the wind. "Let my girl rest by your fire. She's walked since dawn. Can't feel her hands." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, still cradling the child. Táhan gestured to his men, who hesitated, but parted to let the strangers near the warmth. The woman, Ellen Ward, collapsed by the fire, her breath rattling like dry leaves. The girl, Clara, clung to her, eyes wide, darting between the Comanche warriors and the flames. Ellen's story spilled out in broken fragments. Her husband, a miner named Jacob, had staked a claim in the Panhandle, dreaming of silver. But Silas Creed, a mine boss with a stranglehold on Iron Mesa, wanted their land. Jacob was ambushed, shot dead by Creed's hired guns. Ellen and Clara fled, pursued through the night by men with no mercy. An arrow wound in Ellen's side, hidden under her tattered shawl, bled dark into the dirt. She knew she wouldn't see the sunrise. Táhan listened, his face a mask of stone, though his gut churned. He saw his own losses in her words. Children buried on forced marches, wives taken by smallpox, brothers felled by cavalry sabers. The firelight flickered on Clara's face, her eyes holding a mix of terror and hope that stabbed at memories he'd buried deep. Ellen's hand gripped his wrist, her fingers cold as death. "Please," she whispered, blood flecking her lips. "Take Clara. Keep her safe. Give her a fire to warm her. I beg you." Her voice broke, then steadied with a mother's fierce will. "Don't trust anyone in Iron Mesa. even those who call themselves friends. The warning hung in the air like gunpowder smoke, cryptic and heavy. Táhan's jaw tightened. Iron Mesa was a week's ride, a town of whites who'd sooner spit on a Comanche than hear him out. Why warn him of betrayal there? Who was she running from besides Creed? The questions gnawed, but Ellen's eyes were fading, her grip loosening. Clara sobbed, clutching her mother's hand, unaware of the shadow creeping closer to death. Táhan had no love for settlers, no reason to entangle his people in their feuds. But Clara's gaze, raw, trusting, like the children he'd failed to save, cracked something in him. He nodded once, the motion heavy as a war club. "I will keep her safe," he said, his voice low, rough as gravel. Ellen's face softened, a faint smile breaking through the pain. "Thank you," she breathed, then went still, her hand falling limp. Clara's wail rose, sharp and piercing, as Táhan knelt beside the body. The wind howled louder, as if mourning with her. His warriors watched, silent, their eyes asking questions he couldn't answer. The promise he'd made was a chain, binding him to a child, and a fight he didn't want. And that final warning, "Don't trust anyone," echoed like a drumbeat, hinting at dangers beyond Creed's guns. As he wrapped Ellen's body in a blanket, preparing to bury her combed on, Táhan felt the weight of a war he thought he'd left behind, settling over him again. Dawn broke over the Texas Panhandle like a blade splitting the horizon, the cold light barely piercing the thick fog that clung to the frozen earth. Táhan stood over Ellen Ward's makeshift grave, a mound of stones under a gnarled juniper, the wind carrying Clara's soft whimpers from the lodge behind him. The weight of his promise to a dead woman pressed heavier than the war club he'd once swung in battle. Her cryptic warning, "Don't trust anyone in Iron Mesa," gnawed at his mind, a riddle wrapped in blood. He scanned the fog, senses honed by years of tracking enemies through prairie and canyon. Something was coming. He could feel it in the air, sharp as the tang of approaching snow. Inside the lodge, Clara huddled by the fire, her small hands wrapped in strips of hide to warm her frostbitten fingers. Táhan's warriors, Lone Hawk, Swift Knife, and Red Owl, cleaned their rifles, their faces taut with unease. They'd followed Táhan through raids and retreats, but this was different. Protecting a white child meant inviting trouble that could swallow their fragile band whole. Táhan knelt beside Clara, checking her hands. The purple had faded, but her eyes still held the raw edge of loss. "Stay close to the fire," he said, his voice low, steady. "We move soon." The attack came without warning. A horse's snort cut through the fog, followed by the creak of leather and the clink of spurs. Táhan's hand snapped to his revolver, his body low as he signaled his men. 4 riders emerged from the mist, their faces shadowed under wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung across their saddles. Creed's men, no doubt, were sent to erase Clara and any trace of her mother's accusations. Táhan gestured to Lone Hawk, who slipped into the fog with his bow, silent as a ghost. Swift Knife and Red Owl flanked the lodge, their rifles ready. The lead rider, a scar-faced man with eyes like flint, reined up 20 yards out. "Comanche," he barked, "hand over the girl, and we might let you live." His voice carried the arrogance of a man used to getting his way. Táhan stepped forward, revolver still holstered, his presence a challenge. "She's under my protection," he said, each word deliberate, cutting through the cold. The rider sneered, raising his rifle, but before he could aim, an arrow hissed from the fog, piercing his shoulder. He screamed, toppling from his horse as Lone Hawk's second shot found another rider's chest. Chaos erupted. The remaining 2 riders fired wildly, their bullets chewing into the lodge's hide walls. Táhan dove for cover, dragging Clara behind a stack of firewood. Her cry was swallowed by the crack of gunfire and the war shouts of his men. Swift Knife's rifle roared, dropping a third rider, while Red Owl tackled the last, his knife flashing in the gray light. The fight was over in moments, the fog now stained with the coppery scent of blood. 4 bodies lay sprawled in the dirt, their horses snorting nervously. Táhan rose, checking Clara for injuries. Her face was pale, but she was unharmed, clutching the blood-stained letter her mother had given her. He turned to the dead, his eyes narrowing at a glint of silver around the lead rider's neck. Kneeling, he pried loose a pendant, a Comanche star, etched with symbols of a band wiped out a decade ago in a cavalry massacre. His breath caught. How did Creed's man have this? Was it loot from a raid or something darker? A tie to the betrayals that had shattered his people. The discovery twisted his gut, hinting at a web of deceit that stretched beyond Ellen's murder. "We can't stay," Táhan said, his voice tight as he signaled his men to gather the horses. Creed would send more killers, and the pendant suggested a deeper game, one that might involve Iron Mesa's so-called allies. Clara's safety demanded they move, but the town was their only chance to find justice for her mother's death. Táhan bound the pendant in a cloth, tucking it into his belt. "We ride to Iron Mesa," he told his warriors, "but we trust no one." Clara climbed onto a horse behind Lone Hawk, her small arms tight around his waist. Táhan mounted his own mare, his mind racing. Ellen's warning and the pendant were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. Iron Mesa loomed like a viper's nest, its people ready to judge him as a savage before he could speak. As the fog began to lift, revealing the blood-soaked ground, Táhan felt the old warrior's fire rekindle in his chest. He'd made a vow to protect Clara, and whatever secrets lay in that town, whether Creed's greed or a traitor's hand, he'd face them with steel and cunning, or die trying. The sun clawed its way above the Texas Panhandle, burning off the last wisps of fog as Táhan led his small band toward Iron Mesa. Clara rode behind Lone Hawk, her arms tight around the warrior's waist, the blood-stained letter clutched in her fist like a talisman. The Comanche star pendant, taken from Creed's dead gunman, hung heavy against Táhan's belt, its etched symbols a gnawing mystery. Iron Mesa's dusty streets loomed ahead, a sprawl of weathered wood and suspicious eyes, where a Comanche warrior was more likely to meet a noose than a handshake. Táhan's promise to Ellen Ward pulled him forward, but her warning, "Trust no one," rang louder with every step into this viper's den. The town square was a hive of murmurs and glares as Táhan dismounted, his warriors fanning out behind him, rifles loose but ready. Clara slid off the horse, her frostbitten hand steadier now, though her eyes darted like a cornered fawn's. The townsfolk, shopkeepers, ranchers, women in calico, stared openly, their whispers sharp as spurs. "Comanche," one spat, the word a curse. Another, a wiry man with a blacksmith's apron, muttered about stolen horses and raided homesteads. Táhan stood tall, his scarred face unyielding, but the weight of their judgment pressed like a yoke. He'd fought cavalry and outlaws, but this was a different battlefield, one of words and lies. Silas Creed strode into the square, his silver vest gleaming like his mind's, flanked by 2 hired guns with cold eyes and loaded holsters. His smile was all teeth, a predator's grin. "Well now," he drawled, loud enough for the crowd. "The savage brings a white girl into town, bold as brass. Care to explain where her kin are?" The accusation landed like a whip crack, and the crowd's murmurs swelled. Táhan's voice cut through, steady as stone. "Her mother's dead. Killed by your men, Creed. The girl's under my protection." He gestured to Clara, who stepped forward, trembling but defiant, holding up the crumpled letter. "My pa wrote this," she said, her voice small but clear. It says Silas Creed wanted our land, had him killed." The crowd stirred, some leaning forward, others shaking their heads. Creed laughed, sharp and mocking. "A child scribbles? That's your proof?" He turned to the townsfolk, arms spread. "This Indian's spinning tales to cover his crimes. Likely killed her folks himself." The lie took root fast, faces hardening against Táhan. A woman in a bonnet hissed, "Murderer!" Before Táhan could answer, the town hall door swung open, and Judge Amos Reed, a grizzled man with a face like cracked leather, called for order. "We'll settle this properly," he barked. "Inside, now." The hall smelled of tobacco and sweat, its benches packed with townsfolk hungry for a spectacle. If this story's gripping you folks, hit that subscribe button. It keeps us bringing tales like Táhan's to life. Tell us where you're listening from. It means the world. Reed pounded his gavel, silencing the room. "State your case," he told Táhan, his eyes narrow with distrust. Táhan recounted the night Ellen died, her plea, the arrow wound, and the attack at dawn. He held up the Comanche pendant, its silver glinting. "This was on one of Creed's men. It's from a band long dead." "Explain that," the crowd murmured, but Creed shrugged, unfazed. "Loot from some raid. Means nothing." Clara's voice broke the tension, quavering but fierce. "My ma said Creed's men would come for me. She gave me this letter to prove it." She thrust it toward Reed, who scanned it, his brow furrowing. The handwriting was shaky but clear, naming Creed as the orchestrator of Jacob Ward's murder. A ripple of doubt passed through the crowd, but Creed's men shifted, hands hovering near their guns. "Forgeries and fairy tales," Creed sneered. "You gonna let a savage and a kid fool you?" Then a new figure limped through the door, a miner, his leg twisted from an old injury, his face pale but resolute. "I'm Caleb Holt," he rasped. "Worked Jacob's claim. I saw Creed's men gun him down, heard him brag about it." The room erupted, voices clashing. Reed's gavel slammed again, but Creed's face darkened, his calm cracking. "Lies!" he roared, and in a flash, one of his gunslingers drew, firing into the ceiling. Plaster rained down, and panic swept the hall. Táhan yanked Clara behind a bench, his revolver out now, as Creed's men opened fire, turning Iron Mesa's heart into a battlefield. The town hall of Iron Mesa erupted into chaos, the air thick with gunpowder, and the screams of townsfolk scrambling for cover. Táhan crouched behind a splintered bench, and Clara pressed close, her small body trembling as bullets tore through the wooden walls. The midday sun blazed through the windows, casting harsh shadows across the Texas Panhandle's dusty heart in the winter of 1875. Creed's gunslingers, their faces twisted with grim purpose, fired wildly, their shots answered by the sharp cracks of Lone Hawk's rifle from the hall's rear. Táhan's pulse thundered, his grip tight on his revolver, every instinct honed by years of war, now focused on one thing: keeping Clara alive. He scanned the room, spotting Swift Knife and Red Owl weaving through the chaos, their movements fluid as they returned fire. The townsfolk, caught in the crossfire, dove under benches or fled toward the doors, their shouts drowned by the roar of gunfire. Judge Amos Reed, blood trickling from a graze on his temple, bellowed for order, his gavel useless against the violence. Silas Creed stood at the front, his silver vest glinting like a beacon, barking orders to his men, his eyes locked on Táhan, a predator sensing the kill. "Stay down," Táhan hissed to Clara, shoving her beneath the bench as a bullet splintered the wood above. He rose, firing twice, dropping one of Creed's men with a shot to the chest. The hall's doors burst open, spilling the fight onto Main Street, where dust swirled like a storm. Táhan grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her through the side exit into the open, where the sun burned like a furnace. The street was a maelstrom, horses reared, their hooves pounding the dirt as Creed's remaining gunslingers spilled out, joined by 3 more riders galloping in from the saloon. Táhan's warriors followed, their war cries cutting through the din, arrows and bullets flying in a deadly dance. Clara clung to Táhan's side, her breath ragged but her eyes fierce, clutching her father's blood-stained letter. "They won't take me," she whispered, her voice small but iron-hard. Táhan nodded, his jaw set, and pushed her behind a water trough as a bullet whizzed past. Lone Hawk took cover behind a barrel, his rifle barking, while Swift Knife vaulted onto a horse, cutting down a gunslinger with a swift knife thrust. Red Owl, blood streaming from a cut on his arm, loosed an arrow that pinned a rider's hand to his saddle, sending him screaming into the dirt. The townsfolk, now spilling from the hall, formed a ragged circle around the street, their faces a mix of terror and fascination. Some shouted for the sheriff, others for vengeance, but none dared step into the fray. Táhan spotted Caleb Holt, the crippled miner, limping toward a wagon, his eyes wide with defiance as he waved Jacob Ward's letter, shouting, "Creed's a murderer." A gunslinger turned on him, but Táhan's shot caught the man in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Creed himself emerged from the hall, his revolver drawn, his face a mask of fury. "You'll die for this, Comanche," he roared, firing a shot that grazed Táhan's thigh, hot pain flaring but not slowing him. Táhan charged, tackling Creed into the dust, their bodies rolling as fists and steel clashed. The silver pendant, stolen from a lost Comanche band, fell from Táhan's belt, glinting in the sun. Creed's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition, but he said nothing, only swung his revolver's butt toward Táhan's skull. Táhan blocked it, his knife flashing, slicing Creed's forearm, forcing the gun to drop. They staggered to their feet, the street now silent except for the labored breathing of fighters and the nervous snorts of horses. The townsfolk watched, frozen, as Táhan and Creed faced off, dust swirling around them like a shroud. "You took everything from her family," Táhan said, his voice low, resonant as a war drum. "Her mother's last wish binds me. You'll answer for it." Creed spat, his grin twisted. "A savage playing hero? You're nothing but a ghost of a dead tribe." Táhan's revolver rose, steady as stone. "I keep my promises," he said, and fired. The bullet struck Creed's chest, and the mine boss staggered, blood blooming dark against his silver vest. He fell, eyes wide with shock, the life draining from him into the Panhandle's unforgiving dirt. The remaining gunslingers hesitated, then fled, their horses kicking up clouds as they vanished into the horizon. Táhan stood over Creed's body, his chest heaving, the pendant at his feet a silent accusation of secrets, yet to unravel. Clara ran to him, her small hand gripping his. The townsfolk stared, some with fear, others with a dawning respect, as the dust settled over Iron Mesa's bloodied street, where a Comanche's vow had defied a tyrant's greed. The dust of Iron Mesa's main street settled, carrying the weight of Silas Creed's defeat. But the town's gaze lingered on Táhan and Clara, a Comanche warrior and a white girl bound by a dead woman's vow. Winter's grip tightened on the Texas Panhandle in 1875, the air sharp with frost, as Táhan led Clara back to his camp by the dry riverbed, the Comanche star pendant still tucked against his belt, its secrets unanswered. The fight had ended, but the war for trust in this divided town was just beginning, and Táhan knew every step he took with Clara would be watched, judged, and challenged. Night fell, and the camp's fire cast flickering shadows across the buffalo hide lodge. Clara sat close to the flames, her frostbitten hands wrapped in fresh hide strips, her eyes fixed on the embers, as if searching for her mother's face. Táhan's warriors, Lone Hawk, Swift Knife, and Red Owl mended their wounds in silence, their loyalty unshaken, but their faces heavy with the cost of the day's violence. The townsfolk's stares had followed them out of Iron Mesa, some with grudging respect, others with venom that promised trouble. Táhan knelt beside Clara, offering her a tin cup of broth. "Drink," he said, his voice rough but steady. "It'll warm you." Clara sipped, her small hands trembling less now. "Will they come for me again?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind's whisper. Táhan's jaw tightened. He wanted to lie, to promise safety. But the pendant and Ellen's warning, "Trust no one," kept truth on his tongue. "If they do, they'll face me," he said. Her nod was small, but her grip on the cup tightened, a spark of her mother's courage shining through. Days passed, and Iron Mesa remained a fractured place. Some townsfolk, moved by Táhan's stand against Creed, left offerings at the camp's edge. Sacks of flour, a blanket, a pair of child's boots for Clara. Martha Kane, a widow who ran the general store, brought a basket of apples, her face stern but her words kind. "You did right by that girl," she said, glancing at Clara braiding grass by the fire. "Not everyone sees it, but some do." Others, though, spat as Táhan passed through town, muttering about savages, unfit to raise a white child. The sheriff, Tom Vance, kept his distance, his silence a warning that justice in Iron Mesa bent to power and prejudice. Táhan rebuilt the camp with his warriors, reinforcing the lodge against the worsening cold. Clara, at first a silent shadow, began to follow Lone Hawk, watching him fletch arrows. She mimicked his movements, her small fingers clumsy but determined. One evening, she strung a small bow under Red Owl's watchful eye, her first arrow wobbling but hitting the target's edge. The warriors exchanged glances, a rare smile breaking through their stoic masks. Táhan watched, the pendant heavy in his hand. Its symbols hinted at a betrayal older than Creed's greed, perhaps tied to the massacre that had destroyed its original owners. He resolved to uncover its truth, but Clara's safety came first. A week after the battle, a rider approached the camp under a full moon, his horse's hooves muffled by snow. It was Caleb Holt, the crippled miner, his face gaunt but resolute. "Found something," he said, handing Táhan a leather-bound journal. Jacob Ward's, hidden in his claim's shack. Names men who worked with Creed, some still in Iron Mesa. The journal listed bribes, threats, and a deal with a cavalry officer who'd sold Comanche relics, including the pendant. Táhan's blood ran cold. The betrayal Ellen warned of wasn't just Creed's. It reached into the town's heart, maybe beyond. Clara, now learning Comanche words from Swift Knife, began to sing by the fire, her voice soft but clear, weaving English and Comanche in a melody that stilled the camp. Táhan listened, his scarred hands resting on the journal. "Mama said fire keeps the dark away," Clara said, her eyes meeting his. "I think she's watching." For the first time since his tribe's losses, Táhan's eyes stung, the firelight blurring. He saw not just Clara, but the children he'd lost, the promises he couldn't keep. "She is," he said, voice thick, "and she sees you're strong." The camp became Clara's home, her laughter mingling with the warriors' low voices. Iron Mesa's hostility didn't fade, but the offerings grew. Tools, cloth, a doll from an unknown hand. Táhan, once a ghost on the prairie, found purpose in Clara's growth, her trust forging a bridge across the divide of blood and history. The journal and pendant promised a reckoning, but for now, the fire's glow held them, a fragile hope against the coming storms. The firelight fades, but Táhan and Clara's tale of honor and resilience lingers in the Texas Panhandle's windswept dust. What did their story stir in you? Did Táhan's vow or Clara's courage strike a chord? Share your thoughts below. Your voice adds to this saga's echo. We're grateful for your time, for riding alongside us through this tale of promises, kept against all odds. Stay tuned for more stories that cut through the heart of the frontier, where grit and hope collide. Until next time, keep the fire burning, and we'll meet again under the wide prairie sky.